Above the law. The fortress mentality. Why the thin blue line shifted from esprit de corps to a shield against accountability.
A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody. Thomas Paine, Rights of Man.
Chapter 1 showed how Canada's justice apparatus has claimed that very privilege, reserving the right to judge itself. In policing, the same reflex hardens into what officers call the thin blue line, a symbol once meant to honor fallen colleagues, now widely read as a wall between police and the public. That wall is literal as well as metaphorical. The Vancouver Police Board formally banned the thin blue line patch in January 2023 after a citizen complaint, concluding it had become a cultural flashpoint, representing a barrier between the police and the community. Yet some officers refused to surrender the emblem. One wore it at a 2024 protest until superiors ordered its removal. The clash captures this chapter's theme: solidarity tipping into siege mentality. This raises the question: are police leaders truly in control of those they are supposed to lead? Or are they so afraid of the troops that they show them a lot of deference? There exists evidence to support this idea. Footnote:
Vancouver police officers to remove thin blue line patch. January 18, 2023. City News. Vancouver police confirm thin blue line patch isn't allowed on officers' uniforms. January 19, 2023. CBC News. Thin blue line patch is not allowed on VPD uniforms. Vancouver Police Board confirms. January 20, 2023. Global News.
What drives the shift? Part psychology, trauma bonding and moral licensing, and part economics, moral hazard theory. When internal discipline and legal immunities shield officers from personal costs, moral hazard encourages risk-taking, while a repeated game logic rewards silence and punishes whistleblowers. Oversight bodies facing their own prisoner's dilemma often settle for mutual defection, minimal transparency, maximal delay. In the narrative that follows, we trace that evolution from honorable esprit de corps to fortress mentality, show its concrete impact on British Columbia's oversight machinery, and set the stage for Chapter 3, where the line's cultural shield meets the legal armor of Section 579. Origins from the thin line, defined in London, to a Canadian icon. The expression did not begin in blue. Its ancestor was the celebrated thin red line of the 93rd Highlanders at Balaclava, September 25, 1854, when a single rank of Scottish infantry, arrayed in scarlet tunics, halted a Russian cavalry charge during the Crimean War. London journalist William H. Russell's dispatch immortalized the exploit, and Victorian writers quickly pressed the phrase into a metaphor for any embattled vanguard standing between civilization and chaos. By the early 1900s, the color was already mutating. Poets, columnists, and satirists spoke of thin white, brown, or blue lines, attaching the imagery to everything from bishops' processions to public school cadets. The first documented police usage came in New York City. Commissioner Richard Enright, under fire for corruption in 1922, praised his officers as the thin blue line between crime and our 3 millions of population. A generation later, Los Angeles Chief William Parker weaponized the slogan in speeches and a self-produced TV series, casting the LAPD as the last barrier against social and civil anarchy. Novelists like Joseph Wambaugh and, in 1988, Errol Morris's documentary The Thin Blue Line carried the metaphor nationwide. North of the border, the emblem took on a distinctly memorial cast. In 1994, the Police and Peace Officers Memorial Ribbon Society adopted a blue over black mourning ribbon, explaining that the blue band represents the thin blue line that keeps anarchy from society. By the 2010s, the symbol appeared on cruiser decals, shoulder flashes, and commemorative flags from Halifax to Victoria. Its meaning, however, was already bifurcating. For many officers, a gesture of solidarity with fallen colleagues. For critics, a visual declaration that police see themselves as a wall against the public they serve. Reflecting on this, I cannot help but be astonished by the hubris of statements such as represents the thin blue line that keeps anarchy from society. For the most part, society runs pretty well without police, prosecutors, and courts. While they are important, they are not as important as they believe they are. Certainly not as important as the impunity they believe they are entitled to. That tension erupted publicly in January 2023 when the Vancouver Police Board banned on-duty display of the patch after the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner ruled it could be read as a badge of division. Similar debates have since played out in Calgary, Edmonton, and multiple Ontario forces, confirming that the thin blue line has become more than a bit of cloth. It is now a cultural Rorschach test for the relationship between police power and democratic oversight. The turn from solidarity to siege. For most of the 20th century, the thin blue line functioned as a banner of professional pride. But by the late 1970s, the metaphor had begun to harden into a siege narrative. Police cast themselves not just as guardians among citizens, but as a garrison against them. Three forces drove the change. One, escalating external scrutiny. The civil rights era, charter litigation, and expanding news coverage exposed brutality and corruption cases that once died in the shadows. With every inquiry, the line's rhetoric sharpened. Crime and our 3 millions of population was how New York Commissioner Richard Enright framed it as early as 1922. But by the 1980s, Los Angeles Chief William Parker was warning of social and civil anarchy if the wall cracked. The symbol became a rallying cry whenever cameras turned their lens on misconduct, from Rodney King to George Floyd. 2. The Blue Wall of Silence. Empirical studies and Bar Association reports describe an unwritten code that officers do not report colleagues' errors or crimes, a practice now widely labeled the Blue Wall or Code of Silence. The code operates as a reputational insurance pool. Speak out and you lose backup on the street. Keep quiet and the group shields you. Over time, that logic converts esprit de corps into a self-sealing fortress mentality. 3. Narratives of war and existential threat. War on drugs rhetoric, rising gun crime, and later the post-9/11 turn to counter-terror pushed policing language toward combat imagery. A 1998 U.S. Department of Justice Premier already warned that officers viewing themselves as the thin blue line between invading hordes and society face institutional pressure to over-police and under-disclose. Behavioral research corroborates the slide. Repeated exposure to danger plus unconditional peer loyalty breeds moral licensing, the sense that rule-bending is earned by daily risk. Canadian inflection. In Canada, these currents converged during the 2010s. The black and white thin blue line flag migrated north, just as smartphone videos multiplied allegations of excessive force. Critics read the emblem as a signal of defiance. Some chiefs defended it as mourning iconography. When the Vancouver Police Board banned the patch in 2023, the rank-and-file's backlash confirmed that the line now marks an US versus them frontier rather than a purely memorial ribbon foreshadowing the accountability battles explored in the next sections. Takeaway: once external oversight intensified, loyalty rhetoric morphed from an inward-facing bond into an outward-facing shield. What began as solidarity has become siege, laying the cultural groundwork for the legal fortifications, like Section 579 stays, that follow. Contemporary flashpoints, case studies in the fortress at work. Vancouver, 2023-24. In January 2023, the Vancouver Police Board ordered all officers to remove thin blue line patches after an internal review found the symbol had mutated into a barrier between police and community. Barely 3 months later, a VPD constable was photographed wearing the forbidden badge while clearing a homeless encampment on Hastings Street. The image triggered 3 separate complaints to the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner. An adjudicator later noted that displaying the symbol in the very moment officers displaced vulnerable residents only deepened public mistrust. Calgary, 2022-23. The Calgary Police Commission reached the same verdict in March 2022, instructing officers to replace the patch with a less divisive memorial emblem. Within weeks, the police union publicly defied the directive, and by January 2023, many members were still wearing the image or its pin variant, while the commission signaled it would not enforce the ban through discipline. The standoff laid bare a chain of command inversion. Civilian overseers set policy, but cultural allegiance on the street trumped formal orders. Montreal, 2024. Seeking to avoid that kind of stalemate, SPVM Chief Fady Degger in May 2024 unveiled a new black and silver remembrance patch and formally retired the thin blue line. He framed the move as honoring the fallen without building walls with the living. The quiet rollout, no union revolt, no disciplinary threats, suggests that clear replacement rituals can drain the siege symbolism from memorial gestures. RCMP and National Ripple, 2020-2021. Ottawa's 2020 directive banning the emblem across the RCMP met instant pushback. The National Police Federation ordered custom patches for officers and urged them to wear the symbol in open defiance. Mounties at Fairy Creek logging protests complied with the union, not headquarters, demonstrating how a fortress mentality can overwhelm even federal commands. Psychology and economics of the fortress. Police solidarity begins as a healthy esprit de corps, but three reinforcing feedback loops push it toward institutional self-preservation. 1. Moral hazard. Principal-agent problem. Civilian society, the principal, contracts police officers, agents, to enforce the law. When internal discipline, legal immunities, and informal blue wall norms shield agents from the full cost of their mistakes or misbehavior, a classic moral hazard arises. Risk-taking and corner-cutting become rational because the downside is socialized, while the upside, peer approval, career security, remains private. Akerlof and Cranton, Jensen and Meckling, Stiglitz on insurance incentives. 2. Repeated game dynamics inside the unit. Officers interact in a high-repetition game where cooperation, covering for a colleague, is rewarded every shift, while defection, reporting misconduct, triggers immediate sanctions, social ostracism, lost backup, stalled promotion. In the language of game theory, the shadow of the future among peers outweighs any one-off payoff of cooperating with external oversight, so the dominant equilibrium is an internal grim trigger pact of silence. 3. Public oversight game as a prisoner's dilemma. Oversight bodies and police leadership face a dilemma. If either side cooperates alone, e.g. transparent discipline, while the other defects, stonewalls, the cooperator bears the political cost. The lowest risk strategy becomes mutual defection, limited disclosure, procedural delays, and the ritual invocation of ongoing investigation. Absent credible enforcement or incentive realignment, the system locks into a suboptimal equilibrium that privileges institutional harmony over public accountability. For cognitive echoes, vicarious trauma, and moral licensing. Decades of behavioral research show that group trauma bonding and frequent exposure to danger can trigger moral licensing, the sense of having earned latitude to bend rules. The result? Tunnel vision in investigations and a reflex to interpret criticism as an existential threat, the fortress mindset. Takeaway: when esprit de corps collides with an environment of low personal downside and high peer retaliation risk, economic logic predicts exactly what psychology observes: an organization that instinctively pulls up the drawbridge whenever outsiders demand accountability. Governance consequences in BET. British Columbia's oversight architecture looks robust on paper yet. In practice, key levers of control sit inside the very organizations meant to be policed. The Police Act makes the Municipal Police Board responsible for policy and service complaints, but discipline for rank-and-file misconduct remains an internal function. When a public trust complaint is lodged against a constable, the chief constable, not the board, acts as the discipline authority. If the allegation targets the chief or deputy chief, authority shifts to the board chair, still an insider to policing culture. Civilian governors thus issue rules for example the 2023 ban on thin blue line patches, that they cannot directly enforce, explaining why officers felt free to ignore the order until media attention forced action. The Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner, OPCC, was created to add independence, yet its statute limits it to a gatekeeping role. It reviews investigations but does not decide misconduct, and it can escalate to a retired judge only in exceptional cases. Even when dissatisfied, the Commissioner's options are limited, a defect flagged by the BC Civil Liberties Association as far back as 2006. Without power to run its own inquiries or impose outcomes, the OPCC must often accept the very blue wall investigations the fortress mentality encourages. For an aggrieved citizen, the lone avenue of appeal is a judicial review in the Supreme Court of British Columbia, a remedy that can cost tens of thousands of dollars and operates under a deferential reasonableness standard. Courts therefore uphold the OPCC's decisions far more often than they overturn them, making a review petition a poor return on investment for most complainants. In practice, the very architecture of policing shields the thin blue agents and agencies from meaningful public oversight. Internal investigators gather the facts, the OPCC rubber stamps the process, and the courts decline to second-guess either one. The promised independence thus collapses into a closed loop of discretion that leaves the public outside the gate. This structure leaves elected city councils one step removed, municipal boards procedurally weak, and the OPCC substantively constrained. Result: cultural solidarity inside the department routinely outruns civilian directives, while legal accountability grinds through an investigatory chain still controlled by police leadership. The fortress, in short, is built into the governance blueprint itself. British Columbia's oversight architecture looks formidable on paper, yet key levers of control still sit inside the organizations meant to be policed. The same pattern appears in the province's investigative toolkit, the promise of major case management, MCM. After Ontario's Campbell Report exposed systemic failures in the Paul Bernardo investigation, that province legislated a major case management system in 1998, complete with command triangle roles, electronic evidence tracking, and mandatory audit trails. The model was heralded as a way to impose accountability, clear goals, and control over the speed, flow, and direction of an investigation. When BC's Missing Women Commission, Picton Inquiry, issued its Forsaken Report in 2012, Commissioner Oppel urged Victoria to adopt similar provincial MCM standards, noting that the Picton file had been a failure of major case management rather than of resources or dedication. Partial uptake, patchy compliance. The province did roll out an MCM manual and training package, but implementation remained voluntary for municipal departments. A 2019 statutory review found that many detachments used the software only to open a file, then reverted to ad hoc spreadsheets, audit trails, and objective case reviews. Cornerstones of the Campbell model were rarely completed. In short, the new rules asked police to police themselves. Why the fortress blunts the tool? Major case management is a process safeguard. It still relies on insiders to flag errors, escalate concerns, and disclose sensitive leads. When the cultural logic is protect the team first, the very features that make MCM powerful, rigid documentation, external auditability, become liabilities to be bypassed. Researchers reviewing the Picton file found investigators had ample data pointing at the farm, but lacked effective analysis and failed to appreciate its credibility. Again, a breakdown of honest self-scrutiny rather than of software or staffing. Net effect? MCM has improved file organization and interoperability, yet the larger governance picture is unchanged. Civilian boards still cannot compel compliance. The OPCC can review only what the department elects to record, and chiefs retain final say on discipline. The fortress mentality, not technology, continues to decide how far accountability travels. Takeaway: BC imported a state-of-the-art investigative framework, but without external teeth, The system's most demanding safeguards are the easiest to ignore. Major case management did tighten procedure. It did not dismantle the wall. The 4 ways the fortress mentality blunts British Columbia's Independent Investigations Office, IUO. 1. The IIO's structural limits mirror the Section 579 problem. A. Note charging power. Unlike Ontario's Special Investigations Unit, the IIO can only recommend charges. Final word rests with BC Prosecution Service, BCPS. When BCPS declines, the file dies, exactly the executive choke point that throttles private informations. Former Chief Civilian Director Ron MacDonald warned in 2024 that an issue with Crown attorneys approving charges from bodies such as the IIO means serious harm cases often stall. B. Recent high-profile refusals. Miles Gray, 2020. IO forwarded an offense report. BCPS said evidence could not meet the beyond reasonable doubt test and issued a clear statement declining charges. Jared Lowndes, 2024. IO again recommended charges. BCPS refused. First Nations leadership called the decision appalling, and MacDonald publicly questioned why watchdog findings seldom translate into prosecutions. 2. Cooperation gaps give officers the upper hand. A. No statutory duty to hand over notes. An OPCC adjudicator in 2025 noted that, unlike Ontario, BC still leaves the treatment of subject officer notes to informal MOUs. Current practice lets officers privatize their notebooks and withhold them from IIO investigators. B. Right to silence and union counsel. Officers can refuse interviews until every colleague has been debriefed and legal advice obtained, delaying timelines and eroding evidentiary freshness, another wall the IIO cannot scale. 3. Internal culture bleed-through. Independent Investigations Office policy aims for a 50-50 mix of former police and civilian investigators, yet vacancies and recruiting shortfalls have kept the ratio police-heavy. Critics argue that it brings the fortress mindset inside the watchdog itself, softening its edge when peer empathy collides with hard-charging decisions. See 2023, 24 Annual Report Staffing Tables. 4. Net result, a 2-step veto. A. Officer control of evidence. Limited compulsion powers let subject officers decide what material the IIO ever sees. B. Crown control of charges. Even when the IIO pushes through, BCPS discretion functions like Section 579. A single signature can erase the investigation's work. Conclusion. Oversight at half strength. British Columbia advertises a cocktail of accountability. Civilian police boards, an independent investigations office, major case protocols, and a complaints commissioner all poured into the same glass. Yet each ingredient is diluted at the source. Boards can set policy but cannot discipline. The OPCC can critique but not compel. The IIO can recommend but not charge. MCM can log every misstep, yet cannot force anyone to act on the data. At the end of the mixing line sits the BC Prosecution Service, keeper of the ultimate veto. One bureaucratic signature, and the drink is dumped down the sink. The result is all fizz and no gin, a sparkling promise of oversight that evaporates the moment it touches real power. What the public tastes is not justice, but a carefully carbonated simulation, marketed as reform while the fortress walls remain sturdily in place. When most people talk about the thin blue line or the blue wall of silence, they only consider the police. In reality, there is a solid blue fortress that extends from the lowest constable walking the street all the way up to the chief judge on the Supreme Court of Canada, and outward to encompass all those agencies who claim to provide oversight.
Normal is an illusion. What is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. Morticia Addams, the Addams Family.
In other words, what is normal inside the walls of the Blue Fortress is chaos for everyone else. This is above the law, the fortress mentality.